So many of the ingredients of the Indochina tragedy were already visible a decade or two earlier in Korea. The political difficulty of sustaining an unpopular and autocratic regime, the problems of creating a credible local army in a corrupt society, the fateful cost of underestimating the power of an Asian communist army. For all the undoubted benefits of air superiority and close support, Korea vividly displayed the difficulties of using air power effectively against a primitive economy, a peasant army. The war also demonstrated the problem of deploying a highly mechanized Western army in broken country against a lightly equipped foe. Many of the American professional soldiers who served under MacArthur or Ridgway did so later under Westmoreland or Abrams. When they reminisce about the campaigns of 1950 to 53, it is striking how frequently slips of the tongue cause them to substitute Vietnam for Korea in their conversation. Yet because it proved possible finally to stabilize the battle in Korea on terms which allowed the United Nations, or more realistically the United States, to deploy its vast firepower from fixed positions to defeat the advance of the massed communist armies, many of the lessons of Korea were misunderstood or not learned at all. For instance, Pentagon studies showed during Korea, just as they had during World War II, that it was America's lower socio-economic groups which bore the chief burden of fighting the war, and above all of filling the ranks of the infantry. Yet the same phenomenon would recur in Vietnam, and the serious shortcomings of the American foot soldier, the man at the tip of the spear, would once more have serious consequences. In Korea, the Communists enjoyed the opportunity to learn a great deal about the limits of Western patience, the difficulties of maintaining popular enthusiasm for an uncertain cause in a democracy. By the time the armistice was signed at Panmunjom in August 1953, after a mere 3 years of hostilities, the Western Allies had become desperate to extricate themselves from a war that offered so little prospect of glory or clear-cut victory. Yet in Korea the Communists had provided the most ruthlessly simple casus belli, the most incontrovertible provocation by aggression, to be offered to the West at any period between 1945 and this time of writing. As in my past books, I have sought to explore the Korean War through a combination of personal interviews with surviving participants and archival research in London and Washington. In the course of writing it, I have met more than 200 American, Canadian, British, and Korean veterans of the conflict. Perhaps the most exciting aspect of my research has been the opportunity to talk to Chinese veterans, granted to me in 1985 through the good offices of the Peking Institute of Strategic Studies, and the help of the late and much-lamented Colonel Jonathan Alford of the International Institute of Strategic Studies in London. One of the possibilities that first attracted me to the project was that, in the new mood of détente between China and the West, it might be possible to gain some access to a Peking perspective upon the Korean War. After months of discussion and correspondence, this indeed proved to be so. There are no German or Japanese triumphal museums commemorating World War II. It is an eerie experience for a Westerner to walk through the great halls of the Peking Military Museum, gazing upon the trophies of captured British Bren guns and regimental flashes, American .50 caliber machine guns, helmets, and aircraft remains. Yet, if my visit was a measure of how much has changed between China and the West, it was also a reminder of how much remains the same. There is still a great display given over to America's supposed 1952 bacteriological warfare campaign against North Korea. China claims to have inflicted 1,090,000 casualties on the U.S. armed forces in Korea, a figure one assumes was arrived at by adding a few thousands to the total Chinese casualties claimed by the U.S. I spent some fascinating days and nights in Peking and Shanghai, listening to Chinese veterans describing their battlefield experience in Korea. Yet it must be said that none deviated for a moment from strict party orthodoxy in describing their enthusiasm for the war, and satisfaction with the manner in which it was conducted. There is no comparison with the experience of interviewing British and American veterans, whose views reflect such a wide and forthright range of opinion. In Peking, senior officers gave me some fascinating explanations of Chinese behavior. At their Command and Staff College, I had some glimpses of the PLA's military perspective upon various battles. But there remains, of course, no opportunity to check official assertions against archives or written evidence. In a totalitarian state, such as China remains, it is debatable whether even those at the summit of power can discover the historical truth about events in the recent past, even should they wish to do so. In the same fashion, when Mr. Gorbachev claims in a speech that the Soviet Union won the Second World War effectively unaided, it seems rash to assume that he is perpetrating a conscious untruth. It may yet be that he, like the vast majority of his people, simply does not know any better. During my researches in Korea, I must acknowledge an important debt to the U.S. Commander-in-Chief there, General Paul Livesey, who also served during the war as a young platoon commander. To British and American officers who provided me with facilities to visit key locations, such as Panmunjom and Gloucester Hill. And above all to Brigadier Brian Burdett, who stayed on in Korea after the end of his tour of duty, as British military attaché to act as my mentor and guide, and to arrange some fascinating interviews with Korean veterans of the war. I made a decision at the outset to make no approaches to Pyongyang while writing the book. If truth remains an elusive commodity in China, in North Korea it is entirely displaced by fantasy. It seems impossible to gain any worthwhile insights into the North Korean view of the war, as long as Kim Il-sung presides over a society in which the private possession of a bicycle is considered a threat to national security. General Sir Anthony Farrar Hockley was himself writing the British official history of the Korean War, while I was working on my own book. With characteristic generosity, he arranged for me to have access to some of the key official files in his care. He himself remains, of course, one of the most fascinating witnesses of the Korean drama. Not only did he win a Distinguished Service Order as Adjutant of the Gloucesters in their stand on the Imjin in April 1951, but he returned from 2 years' Chinese captivity with a reputation for indomitable courage and determination. His official history will clarify a host of details about British participation in the war, and no doubt add new revelations. In Britain and the United States, I interviewed as wide a cross-section as possible of officers and men of all three services. I did not, because of their great age, seek meetings with a handful of the most senior officers who survive. From past experience I have found that very elderly veterans have long ago said and written all that they wish about their great campaigns. To discuss these again merely starts a conversational train running upon familiar railway lines. It becomes fraudulent to acknowledge their assistance because it is so rare that they wish to say anything of substance. After 35 years, with very rare exceptions, the most helpful witnesses about the conduct of a campaign are those who held regimental and battalion commands, and staff officers who served under the principal commanders, whose memories are often remarkable. I shall always cherish the 4-hour word portrait of MacArthur's headquarters at the Daiichi, drawn for me by that great and wholly delightful American soldier who served there in 1950, Colonel Fred Ladd. Likewise, I am much indebted to Brigadier General Ed Simmons, USMC, who is not only director of the Marine Corps Museum in Washington, but also a veteran of the Chosun campaign, and an uncommonly shrewd critic of the Korean experience. This book, like those I've written upon other campaigns, does not purport to be a comprehensive history. The most scholarly account of pre-war Korea is that of Bruce Cummings. Even after 25 years, the British author David Rees's Korea, the Limited War remains the best overall narrative, above all about the American political aspects. More recently, Joseph Goulden uncovered new American archival sources for his Korea, the Untold Story. Dr. Rosemary Foote, of the University of Sussex, author of The Wrong War, and another pioneer researcher, was characteristically generous in discussing her own reflections and sources about